If you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Samuel. This last several months, we've been playing a game in our car. It's actually probably been for a year now. And you guys have probably done this before too, but this one's kind of common. As we drive from place to place, we go from here to there, we'll be watching for this specific car. And if it's yellow, you say, "Yellow car." Anybody play this game? And so we drive around the town and we'll be in dead sentence. Brooke will be saying something. All of a sudden, Carson will say, "Yellow car." And then we go, "Oh, we missed it." And we pick up the conversation again. And we drive around, "Yellow car, yellow car." I have 3 mirrors at my disposal. I don't see them. I'm supposed to be paying attention to what's going on in front of me. And they pick up the yellow cars before I do. And you get this little game going. And then Melanie has another game that she likes to play. And she's trained her eyes to see this. And that is license plates from different states. And she takes pictures of them. We've tried to tell her not to do that while she's driving, and she's done that now. But she'll take pictures of those license plates, and she's the only one playing that game. I tried to play, but I'm looking for yellow cars. That's what I'm looking for in yellow cars. And I've trained my eyes to look for yellow cars. And if I can find them, I want to say "yellow car" fast. And the other day, I got like 3 of them in a row. "Yellow car. Yellow car, yellow car." Oh, and you hear the kids in the back going, "I wish I had seen that." And basically what you look for and what you train your eyes to see is what you will see. If you train your eyes to look for something, green cars, red cars, yellow cars, that's what you will see because you have trained your eyes to find them. If you're looking for license plates, you will train your eyes to look for those license plates. Well, there's license plates, yellow cars. If you train your eyes to look for them, you will find them. And if there was ever a man who had his eyes trained to see what God was seeing, it was Samuel. Samuel was used to seeing things the way man sees them, but God was going to change the way that he saw things so that Samuel would look for the things that God is looking for, that Samuel would have his eyes trained to see something else. We've been preaching through the Bible or through a curriculum of the Bible, and we made a big jump this week. Last week we were talking about Joshua in Joshua chapter 2. We're going forward in a big hurry, 330 years. The land has been conquered by the nation of Israel. They have not occupied all of it yet, but a lot of time has passed. Joshua leaves them with the great command, and you remember the verse, he says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." If you can imagine a General Patton type figure saying that with his fingers, saying, "Put away your idols, and for me and my house, we serve the Lord." And then Joshua goes off into the sunset, leaving the land for them to occupy and to follow the Lord. The book of Judges records how they did, and it wasn't very good. In fact, it's a cyclical book. It goes around and around, much like your clock. They start off obeying. That's 12 o'clock. They go to 12:15. They start to disobey. At 12:30, God disciplines them. At 12:45, they cry out to God. And at 1 o'clock, God restores them, and they start obeying God. And it goes around and around and around like this for some 330 years. They obey, they disobey, they cry out, God disciplines, they cry out, God restores, and they bring him back. And this is the story of the nation of Israel. And is this not the story of your individual life at times? Don't shake your head, everyone's looking. This is what it looks like, right? This is how that works. God always hears their cry, and God always delivers them. God is faithful. God will bring them back and bring them into blessing if they will follow him. And when they cry out to them or to him, God restores them. God is faithful. And you might hear that and think, "Well, look at that. There's a cycle. So I can obey for a while, then disobey for a while, then cry out to God, and he'll bring me back. And so I can just go ahead. Is this licensed to do this?" Well, God is faithful, but don't be dumb. Okay? Follow God and allow that to be the hallmark of your life. God is faithful. God will restore. God will hear your cry for help. But don't do that. The whole book of Judges is terrible. You ought to read it. It's awful. In fact, it ends on such a sour note. You close it and think, there's no hope. This is going badly. And it is. And then you get Ruth that comes next. The story of Ruth and how God is restoring the nation of Israel in a different way. And then you get the story of Samuel and how he is put into a place as he's going to be prophet and judge. He's the final judge of the nation of Israel, and he's going to spend his whole life going from city to city, telling people how they need to follow God. This is his ministry. He has been called to it since he was a little boy. His mom put him in the temple for this very purpose. It's a wonderful story of Samuel. And he gets to this place in his life, and he's discouraged because the man that he thought was going to be the great king of Israel, that would restore Israel to its position and project it all the way through for a long, long time, is Saul. And Saul has been terrible. Saul has rejected God. Saul has refused to follow God, and he has been put aside by God. God has set Saul aside. And he had everything you could possibly want in a king. He had good looks. He had a good family history. He was a good warrior. He had height. He was strong. He was tall, dark, and handsome. Wow, that's got to be a king. And most of the nations around Israel would have thought so that way as well, because that's what they're looking for in a king. They wanted tall, they wanted dark, they wanted handsome, they wanted strong, and that's what Israel wanted. But that's not what God required. It would have worked well for any other nation, because those nations only look on the outside. The nation of Israel is on the inside. He would have worked really well for them. He had all the charisma you could want, but he had no character. And charisma without character leads to catastrophe. And that's exactly what has happened to the nation of Israel. And so in chapter 15, you get Saul's final act of disobedience, and Samuel is just despondent. Saul has been set aside, and Samuel has had to do some terrible things in chapter 15, and it's incredible stories of what Samuel has done. This is not, when you think of a prophet, quite honestly, you probably think of somebody who's kind of smallish. They're the bookworms, maybe. They're not very strong, and they're preachers, okay? They're just not these big hulking men. Well, in chapter 15, Samuel takes a sword to a fella, and it is bad. Samuel is brave, he is courageous, he is strong, and he is feared, and he's also depressed. And when you get to chapter 16, you see where he's at in verse 1. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself." And so Samuel's vision has been clouded. He is discouraged. He's not seeing things the way God sees things. All he sees is that Saul has failed. That's all that he sees. And he's depressed. He is saddened. His heart is broken. And so if you can picture him in his tent, and he's just in deep sorrow, in deep mourning, all he sees is this great disappointment that Saul has become. His heart is broken in grief. In fact, that's what my text says there. How long will you grieve over Saul? That's all that Samuel sees is his grief. All that Samuel sees is disappointment. All that Samuel sees is that his heart has been broken, and all he wants to do is just sit there and wait. Grief is a powerful emotion. I've been through it. I've been through it with many families. Grief that turns to mourning is a healthy thing, but sometimes people will get stuck in grief. You know, the psalmist one day will say, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Notice the walking through. It's not a place you stay, it's something you walk through. And it seems as though Samuel is stuck inside of this valley. We're not supposed to dwell in the valley of grief. We're not supposed to pitch our tent in that valley. We're supposed to walk through that valley. And as believers, we walk through because our God is a God of hope. Our God is a God of victory. Our God is acquainted with grief. Our God calls us out of grief. That's where Samuel has settled, and that's all he can see. His eyes are trained upon grief. He's disappointed, and God calls him out. Anytime you put your hope in man, you will experience incredible grief. Expect to get stuck in some kind of valley. And Saul has been a great disappointment to Samuel. Samuel put all of his hope in Saul, and there he is, stuck in the valley of the shadow of death, and God calls him out, just like he did Joshua. Remember those first chapters of Joshua, the first part? Joshua is in grief because Moses is dead. And God says to Joshua, "Moses, my servant, is dead." He says it 3 times. "Moses, my servant, is dead." "Oh, Joshua, he's dead. But I am not." He says to Joshua, be brave and courageous, and let's get into the land. And what he says to Samuel here is, Saul has failed, but I have not. Let's go. Let's go. Let's get rolling. I've got some things in store for you, and it's going to be great. It seems to me the first thing that we need to see when we face disappointment, sadness, and grief is what God sees, and that is hope. He sees through that grief. He sees through disappointment. He sees through a broken relationship, a broken marriage, a lost job, a difficult financial time. He sees through bad health. He sees through all those things, and he is a God of hope. And he pulls us through, and I do not mean to belittle grief. I think it's important to experience that. I think it's important to walk through that. I believe God does as well. God has grieved over mankind before the flood. In Psalm 78:40, the psalmist tells us that God grieved over the nation of Israel because of their hardness of heart. Jesus wept before Lazarus' tomb. He cried, even though he knew in just a couple minutes he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Grief is not a bad thing. What becomes bad is when we get stuck. And what God calls Samuel to is to train his eyes on hope. God presses forward. God moves us forward. It's terribly hard for us to do this because we only see what was and what is. Hope comes when we can see what will be, and that's what God sees. God sees what can be, and that's why he presses forward in hope, and he invites Samuel to join. I can just imagine God. He's up in the heavens. He sees his prophet there in deep despair. He's in grief. He's in sorrow. He's disappointed. And God says, hey, how long are you going to stay here? How long are you staying here? Let's go. Let's go. Fill your horn with oil. Let's go. I got things I want to do. I got places I want to go. Let's do this. God is a God of optimism. He's a God of excitement. He's a God who has the future plan. He never loses, ever, and he's excited about what's going to come next. And so he says to his prophet, let's go. I've got things to do. I've got places to go. And so God calls Samuel, grab your horn, fill it with oil, move. God's optimism is great. There's a boy that God has been grooming for a great event. God has been developing a young man for leadership. It's been about 12 years. But even before this 12 years, this boy is 12 years old. David is only 12. But even before that, God has been grooming the line of Jesse. Jesse's related to Obed, who's related to Boaz, whose mother is Rahab, who's related to Salmon, who's related to Nahshon, who's related to Amminadab, who's related to Ram, to Hezron, to Perez, and then to Judah. The line of Judah. God has been working a plan, and he has a young man who's going to fill that plan, because the line of Judah, the promise is this: the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of all the peoples. God is working a plan, and God can't wait for it to come about. He's got this 12-year-old boy who's out there in the pasture lands of Bethlehem, and he can't wait to get Samuel there. Disappointment, grief, yes. Hope, most certainly. But we got to train our eyes to see it. And this is God's optimism. He's never thwarted, defeated. He's never behind. He's never at a loss. He presses forward because he rules the future. He knows what's coming. And so he says, get up, fill your horn, let's go. And you know what Samuel does? How can I go? It says in verse 2. When Saul hears of it, he'll kill me. He hesitates. I can't go do that. Saul, kill me. I can't get up and go. What if Saul finds out? Can you imagine being God in the heavens? This sounds just like Moses. Moses did the same thing. Moses is out there wandering around Midian, covering his sheep, taking care of everything. And God says in a burning bush, hey, I want you to go to Pharaoh. And Moses says, yeah, kind of busy, got sheep. What happens if Pharaoh doesn't like me? And God's in his heavens going, when am I going to find a man of faith who will just say, okay, let's go? There's only few and far between men who will say yes. There's very few and far between where women who will say yes. And without hesitation, they will simply go. And what Samuel is learning is to train his eyes to see the certainty of God. What Samuel sees is fear. But Saul, he'll kill me. Come on, man. Get up. But what about Saul? God, God is not a God of fear. He's a God of certainty. That when God puts a plan in place, it will happen. We tend to work on the basis of fear. Well, I don't know. That could go wrong. Yeah, it could. But what if that breaks? It might. But what if it doesn't work as I planned? It probably won't. And we get scared and we get nervous. Well, I don't know. That could result in disaster. Yeah, it could. My kids will ask me that. Dad, could this go wrong? Sure. Yeah, it could. Will it? Probably not. We do this when we go to the ocean. But Daddy, there are sharks in the ocean. Yes. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, there are sharks in the ocean. They could bite. Yeah. Yeah, they could. Will they? Probably not. You don't taste good. Then probably not. They're going to bite somebody else. There's hundreds of people on the beach. What are the odds? They'll get somebody else and I'll teach you to swim fast. It'll be fine. It's amazing how fast you can swim when you know there's a shark in the water. This all could go wrong. It could. Will it? Could. Probably not. God is a God of certainty. Here, Samuel hesitates. All he can see is his fear. He doesn't see God's certainty. He's got to train his eyes to see hope, and he has to train his eyes to see God's certainty. He is certain because he is sovereign. And if we'll just trust the sovereignty of God, where God calls, God equips. Where God leads, God will provide. You just have to trust God and walk by faith. There's reason and logic involved, of course, but you just have to follow him. He'll take care of things that you never even thought could go wrong. God knows everything possible and probable, and he knows everything that could possibly go wrong, but he also knows what certainly will go right. God looks down and he hears his whiny prophet who's learning to train his eyes, and he says, nonsense. He says it in verse 3, or in verse 2, take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice. Poor heifer. It seems like the cows are always getting thrown under the bus, right? Every time something good happens, bring a cow. Bad happens, bring a cow. Cows never catch a break. The last thing you want to be in the Bible is a cow. And so, get a cow, get a heifer, bring it. God addresses Samuel's fear, but doesn't allow him to pitch his tent there. God says, your fear? Sure, get a cow. You're going to simply say, you're going to go there to sacrifice. He's not lying. This is what Samuel does all the time. This is a logical response. Yeah, that could possibly happen. So just bring you a heifer, and you're going to go down there, and you're going to sacrifice. Bring you a cow, we're going to go down there and sacrifice. God sees hope where Samuel only sees despair, and God pulls him out of grief into hope. Train your eyes to see God's hope. Look for it. God sees certainty where Samuel only sees fear, and God pulls him out of fear into certainty. Train your eyes to see God's certainty, that God is able to do more than you can ask or think. Fears abound, and many of them are real. Things could go badly. That's true. Things might go all wrong. The worst is a possibility. But we have a God of certainty, almost. Certainty. Hope and certainty. God will take care of this. I like riding roller coasters. Anybody here like riding roller coasters? The thing I love about roller coasters is when you take somebody who's never been on one, and so I love riding with that person, especially the long line. You know, it's an hour-long line, and you're going to ride for 45 seconds. So you have an hour long to fear with only 45 seconds of pure joy if you can get past the fear. Some of you are shaking your heads at me. It's really true. And so they get on this whole line. They're going, what happens if this? What happens if that? What happens if this? And my favorite thing to say is, there is not a cord of bodies behind a fence somewhere, okay? There isn't. You are probably going to be just fine. Probably. People do die on these. That's true. That's true. But you'll probably be okay. And what you have to do is trust the engineer that he's already got it lined up. And what's the most frightening thing for anybody riding a roller coaster is you wait through this long zigzag line and you get up to the top of the platform and you realize that this whole thing is being run by teenagers. Some of them can't even drive yet, and they're up there pushing, and that does not settle anybody's nerves, okay? And so you trust the engineer who put all of this together, who organized this whole thing, that God is going to, that the roller coaster is going to work. And church, is the same thing with God. When you follow God, when God calls you to do something, push through the fear and trust the engineer. That's it. God will take care of things. Samuel has trained his eyes to see the God of hope and the God of certainty. Now he's going to train his eyes to see beyond the shell of a man and to see what God sees. God sees the heart, where Samuel only sees the display. God sees what's going on in the inside. Samuel only sees what's on the outside. You've got to train your eyes to see the heart. And so Samuel gets up in verse 4, and he did what the Lord said, and he came to Bethlehem. And the elders greeted him at the city gates, and they were trembling. Do you come in peace? You'll have to read chapter 15 to figure out why they say that. Do you come in peace? Yes, in peace I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves, which means take a bath, change your clothes, and come to sacrifice. And he also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before me. He'd just taken a shower, changed his clothes. He's a tall, good-looking, handsome man. Jesse's got good-looking boys. And so he sees Eliab come in. He says, oh, that's the man. That's the new king. And what Samuel is ready to do is to make the same mistake twice. He did this with Saul. And now he's ready to do this with Samuel. The nation wanted that king that looked good. Eliab is the same. He's all flash. There is no content to Eliab. And so when he walks in, he comes in and he's looking sharp. He smells good, looks good. Samuel says, surely this is the man. And then God slows him down and says in verse 7, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God sees hope, and we have to train our eyes to see through grief, to see hope. God is a God of certainty. We have to train our eyes to see through fear. God sees the heart. We have to train our eyes to see through the shell into the heart of the person. Now, don't get me wrong, the shell is important. It has a place. It'll describe David here just in a little while. He's a good-looking, handsome, ruddy-looking man. It means he's got red-toned skin, and he's a good-looking young man. The shell is important, but it's not the most important. The shell has its place. It's just not the first place. What God is most interested in his men and in his women is what's going on inside of the heart. And this was the case in 1025 BC. That men and people were consumed with the appearance over aptitude. They were concerned with everything on the outside, nothing on the inside. And it's true today, some 3,042 years later. We're consumed with the appearance. We want to look good, smell good, have good things, and give the appearance of depth. And we get lacking time and time again. And so Jesse brings in Aminadab, and he is found lacking as well. In comes Shammah, and he too comes up empty. 4 other boys are presented to Samuel, and all 7 of them are rejected. Can you just imagine what this has got to feel like? Eliab comes walking in. Hey, no. Shammah, no. The other guys don't even get their names listed. No, 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 no. Do you have anybody else? Anyone else? Anybody out there? And Jesse's scratching his head. And sometimes Jesse gets thrown under the bus at this moment because he forgot his son David. I don't know if that's the case. This is a surprise visit that Samuel has made. David left in the morning or maybe the day before to go take care of the sheep out in the pasture land. He could have been out there for a few days. So he's out there, and so Samuel shows up, and everything is happening in a big fat hurry. And then Samuel gets to the whole list, and Jesse, do you have any other boys? Yes, I have one more, but he's at work. He's out there in the field, and he's the youngest. Go get him. The greatest line in the text is, we're not going to eat until you do. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Go get him. Because the heifer has been slaughtered. The smoke has been going on. This is going to be a great meal. And so off the servant goes to get David, and they're all waiting for David to come back. I wonder what they talked about. So why didn't you like Eliab? Well, not a fan of the No. God said no. What about Aminadab? Nah. And they're lobbying for this. Then here comes this little boy. He's little. He's 12. He comes walking in, and his brother's like, oy vey, which is a Jewish word for, oh, the misery. Oh, here he is. Oy, here he is. And David comes walking in. What's up, fellas? I smell food. Do y'all come in for dinner? Oh, Samuel did. We just soon left you out there. And as soon as he walks in the room, and as soon as Samuel sees him, God says, that's the one. That's the one. Samuel said, he goes, so he brought him in. Samuel takes the horn, or when he walks in, the Lord says to Samuel, arise and anoint him, for this is he. That's the man. That's the man I'm looking for. The short, little, 12-year preteen. He's in 5th grade, y'all. 5th grade. That's the next king of Israel. He's the only one in the Old Testament named David. He's the king. 12-year-old little boy comes walking in, scrawny, tired, dirty. Arise. What did God see that Samuel didn't? Of course, God saw the heart. God has been developing inside the heart of this boy a man who would follow after him, a man who would passionately pursue the things of God. And what's fascinating about this, God also saw Bathsheba. God also saw the census. God also saw failure. God saw it all. But God saw inside of him a heart that was malleable, that was soft towards him, and God could do great things through that boy. God saw past the future sins. God saw past the past sins. And God saw a young man who would be pleasing to him in ways that none of his brothers could accomplish. We have to train our eyes to see the hope that God has, the certainty of God, and the heart that God is working on inside of the person. Mom and dad, you don't know who you're raising, do you? I mean, you know them now, but you don't know what God is doing in that little boy or that little girl. You just don't know what they're going to become. And so you have to steer them in the right direction so that God has all of the opportunity to develop in them a heart that is soft towards him. When you go out inside the public today, that's not just a waitress. That's a real life person that God is trying to work in. And she's trying to keep her kids in school, please a boss, a customer, complete an order, and manage her home, and maybe all by herself. Look past the task and see the heart of that person. It's not just a mechanic. That's a human being searching for significance and appreciation. That's not just an immigrant. That is somebody trying to do better for their children. That's not just a patient. That's a person who is scared about what is next for them and their families. And that's not just a doctor. That is a person who truly cares about his patients and just hopes that his patients will have a little bit of patience. It's not just a nurse. That's a nurse trying to care for somebody who's ill. See the heart. Look beyond the circumstance and try to see the human being involved. Those aren't just tattoos, and there are a lot of them, but they are on a person who needs to know the love of Christ. It's not just a teenage mom. That is a person who made a good decision and needs our support. Look past the outside and see the heart. Samuel, like us, like everybody in between us, is consumed with the external. God says, I want you to see hope, I want you to see certainty, and I want you to see the heart, which is what I see. This 12-year-old boy who's tending sheep, a little reddish, handsome with pretty eyes, that's the next king. The author of most of our Psalms, the slayer of giants, and the ancestor of the Messiah. That's him. You just never know who you're dealing with, do you? But there's a part of this whole thing that is a little convicting. God rejects Eliab, he rejects Abinadab, he rejects Shema because their heart is not in the right place. He knows their heart. He knows David's heart. And he knows yours. He knows mine. He knows what's going on in here. He knows my motives. He knows my authenticity. He knows my consistency. He knows everything that's going on inside of me. He knows beyond your bravado. He knows beyond your big talk. He knows that grief. He knows that fear. He knows what you're hiding from. He knows. He knows your heart too. So you look at this and you think, yeah, we're supposed to look beyond the heart, and God is looking into mine. Ooh. And so that verse that Amy read just a few moments ago is found in Psalm 139, written by this young little boy who was out tending sheep. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. That's a prayer you can pray today. Lord God, search my heart. Is there anything wicked in there? Is there? Ask him. And he'll answer your question. He will. He's drawing you closer to himself. And so while we can say, look, train your eyes to see hope, train your eyes to see God's certainty, train your eyes to see the heart of people, God is looking at your heart and he sees it. And so ask him, dear Lord, search me. What's going on in here? Know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. If there's any wicked way in there, let me know. And lead me into the path of everlasting. It's one of the most powerful prayers you can pray. Search me, know me, and lead me. Train your eyes to see through grief. Train your eyes to see through fear. Train your eyes to see the heart. And then invite God to look at yours. And what you'll need to do at that moment after you ask God to look at your heart is get real quiet. And just give him a moment to tell you. Lord, what's in my heart? What's in my heart? And allow him to work that out. And please know, he's a God who loves you more than anything. He's not going to go, oh my goodness, what is that? He already knows. And he's inviting you to invite him to look at it and to graciously remove things that are there that need to be taken away. Oh, but I love that. Yeah, I know. But it's in the way of something that's really, really good. So let it go. Get rid of that and allow God to lead you in the way of everlasting.